In this episode of the Mixdown, we're going to be looking at mixing one single piano track. I'll also show you a cool Max for Live device that can help give your digital piano a more acoustic live sound. Hello, and welcome to the Mixdown. The Mixdown is a new series on this channel where I'm going to be taking you inside of my sessions in Ableton Live to show you how I mix and how I produce the tracks that I've been posting on the channel for the last few years. These first few episodes are going to be ramping up to looking at a full mix. So for this first mix, we're just going to be looking at one solo piano track. And the challenge is, how do we take a digital piano sound and then through mixing, help it to sound less sterile and more organic and a little bit more compelling? The way that we're going to do that is very simple. We're going to have the single piano track, we're going to use one reverb send, and we're going to use one delay send, and there'll be a little bit of processing on the master bus. So before we get to all of that stuff, the first thing we have to do is track the piano. Here's the video of me playing the Super Mario Bros. Theme. One thing that I like to do when using hardware synthesizers is run them through analog preamps. Unfortunately, I dropped my bass on my main preamp and it was out getting repaired at the time that I filmed this video. So I decided to just embrace the unique character of this particular keyboard. I started by finding a patch that I liked, which was the dark grand piano sound. Then I tweaked the onboard EQ a little bit and used some of the native reverb. Then I ran the stereo output directly into my interface and recorded the audio. Now that we have the tracking done, let's just hear the difference between the dry signal and then where we end up with the mix. So here's the dry signal. Just sounds kind of bland and sterile and not that impressive. Here's the full mix. It's just a little bit more full, a little more compelling, and a little bit more organic sounding. And it's also louder. This is because we have to get it to a certain level if we're going to distribute it for like streaming platforms or YouTube or whatever. Because you want to have like a competitive sounding recording. But anyway, as I mentioned in the tracking section, I didn't have use of my normal preamps, so I built a preamp in Ableton. I have a whole separate video on how I built it, which is designed to just be an introduction into how to build instrument racks. So if you want to watch that, you can check out that video. If you don't want to build it yourself, it is free to download in the description. So let me just walk you through what it is. So I have an instance of the tube preamp on the dry signal. The reason why you would want to use a preamp is because in an analog system, you want to have something that's going to boost the level of your source before it hits the amplifier. The reason you would want a dedicated preamp and not just use an amplifier is because it is going to give you a more favorable signal to noise ratio. So you're not going to get as much hum and noise if you're boosting the signal first going into the amplifier and then ultimately to your speakers. So the way that this one is designed, there's an input, a phase invert, a negative 20 dB pad. This coloration knob is just to simulate the harmonic distortion that is imparted by tubes, analog tubes. There's a high pass filter, which is going to trim the extreme low end. Then there's an EQ section with a low, mid, and high, and the mid has a sweepable band. And then there's ultimately the output section, which is what's going to be hitting your mixer. So if we just play the dry signal and I just drive the input, you can start to hear that distortion. So those are the tubes and a little bit of the saturation in the circuit. So one way that I will use a preamp is I might cut some of the output first and then say, all right, this is giving me a little bit of headroom to now drive in. And I'll kind of use that to taste. Maybe sometimes I want an overdriven signal, maybe sometimes not so much. So if I don't want an overdriven signal as much, I can use this pad. So the way I would do that is I would just turn it all the way to the right. Now the pad is engaged, and you can hear the signal is much quieter. So now we have much more headroom that we can drive into. And this is just giving it a little bit of warmth. So, slight gain difference, but you can hear that it's just a little bit of a warmer signal, especially if I start bringing in the coloration. Now the signal's getting warmer. If I want to drive it a little bit harder, I can cut some of the output and then drive the input some more or whatever I want. Now, another thing I might do is say I'll turn on the high pass filter and boost the lows. Now I'm getting a little bit more distortion than maybe I want. And then maybe I will boost some mids around 800 just to give it a little bit of warmth. And then maybe float the highs a little bit just to give it some air. And then now, if I turn this off, we're about at the same level, but this one maybe... So we've added a little bit of gain, and let's just hear the side by side again. So, okay, so I've boosted a little bit of gain, but you can hear that there's already a little bit of a difference in the sound. So then now, let's take a look at actually mixing the keyboard track. So let's take a look at the chain that I have on the piano. After the preamp, we're going into EQ, which is Fab Filter Pro Q4, and there's just 3 simple moves that I'm doing here. It's a side shelf around 5K just to give it a little bit of air and space and width. Another also side filter, and this is a high pass filter because I'm trying to cut out the lows from the sides of the channel. I want to center the lows in the middle. And then in the mid, I'm pushing a shelf around 100, and this is just to give it a little bit of heft in that center of the channel. So let's hear what this sounds like. This is with the EQ off. And that's with the EQ on. Very subtle. Then we're going into a compressor. This is a VCA compressor, Ableton's glue compressor. The idea here is not that I want to compress so much of the signal. What I want to do is very minimal compression, but I have this set to a slow attack and a moderate release, because what I want to do is just thicken the signal, add a little bit of coloration, and then mostly I'm using this compression for sustain of the notes. So then we go from there into an instance of Saturn, another Fab Filter plugin, and a lot of times with these a mix like this, I don't want to overthink it. So I just came in and just took one of the presets that I like, which is Mythical 3D BM. And this is a common thing that I will do with saturation a lot, which is I will do multi-band saturation. So I'm separating the lows, the mids, and the highs. And I'm using different algorithms on each one. So you can see this is a transformer algorithm, this is a tape algorithm, and then this is back to a gentle transformer algorithm. And these are, but they're a little bit different in how they're EQ'd, and then also the drive is different. So let's hear with that. This is no saturation, and there's the saturation. Just very subtle. Now, this next one is kind of interesting. This is PIANERB. This is a Max for Live device. This simulates the reverb that happens inside of the chamber of a body of a piano. So before we go, this is where we're going to kind of like zoom in on this a little bit. So we're going to go back to the dry channel here, and just so I can kind of show you how this works. So this is no PIANERB engaged. Now I have the plugin on, but nothing's happening. So if I decrease the damping, nothing's happening because this is dry wet is at 0. So there we go. Okay, now the dry wet is 100%, so we're just hearing PIANERB. So damping will do just that. It will basically decrease the time of the reverb. And age adds in a little bit of modulation, which can be nice. Body is kind of sounds to me like an EQ, like a filter, and like an EQ sweeping an EQ filter. And then size is just like on any reverb plugin, just kind of increasing the dimension of the reverb. So if we just, and then of course we have high pass filter, so we can let in more lows or we can cut out some lows. And we can do the opposite here. We can cut out some highs. So this is just an arbitrary, you know, some arbitrary settings, and then now let's kind of blend it in. So that's PIANERB. PIANERB is pretty cool, and you can use it on anything. You can use it subtly, you can use it extremely, but I thought it was a kind of a nice choice just to add a little bit of that acoustic piano body. And then we have one final reverb, and I'm just using FabFilter's Pro R2 just because it's easy to use. And the difference here is I'm using another preset. This is Fat Ambience. And if I turn it on, it's very subtle. I only have about 2% in. And the reason is it's just giving a little bit of extra body and dimension and sense of space, but it's almost imperceptible. Now let's take a look at how we're using reverb and delay. So we do have a little bit of reverb happening on the channel itself, but most of the sense of reverb is coming from this Reverb Send. So when you use a send, basically what you're doing is you're taking a copy of your original audio and sending it to another channel. Reverb sends are advantageous for a few reasons. One, they can give your track cohesion, sonic cohesion, because I can send a keyboard to it, I can send a snare drum to it, I can send a pad to it. So kind of having different instruments going to the same sends is going to help create a sense of space. And then also they are CPU efficient, which is also important when your tracks get bigger and bigger. So good practice is just to add a high pass filter somewhere to just cut out the extreme lows, so you're not getting the lows reverberating and rumbling in your track. So just simple EQ8 here, and then again a preset, Valhalla Vintage Verb, great reverb plugin, and large wood room preset, because that seems like a good place to have a piano. So let's hear what that sounds like. So this is the Reverb Send soloed. And all I did here was just kind of, you know, blend it into taste. So if I hear them both together, that's without the Reverb Send, and then I kind of just use my ear and my instinct to say, somewhere around here feels good. So now let's take a look at the delay. And the delay, same thing, another high pass filter. And then basically this is, the interesting thing about this delay is that I'm using different settings, time settings on the left and the right. So if we listen to just the delay, and the idea with that is just, if you're in a space, you know, say you're watching somebody play a piano and you're standing in whatever proximity to it, there's going to be different objects in that space that sound is going to, as it expands and travels across the space, it's going to bounce off different surfaces at different times, and it's going to reach your ears at different times as well. So it's just kind of a way of simulating a real environment. So hearing the two sends together sounds like this. Sorry. There we go. And I treat with sends, I like to treat them almost as different, separate instruments in the mix. And I just treat the same way that I would treat any other instrument in terms of balancing my faders and sometimes even panning. I just treat it the same way. I know, like, kind of what's the main instrument that I want to have be the point of focus, and then I just build layers of perspective beyond that. So now let's take a look at the master chain. The master bus is arguably doing the most work on this mix. So let's just talk down what's happening. In this group of plugins, I have a group of PULTEC EQs. So starting with the HLF3C, which is high pass filter and low pass filter. So it's just cutting out the extreme lows once again. And then there's a bit of a low pass filter around 12K, just to smooth out some of the harshness in the high end, because that piano kind of has that quality to it. Then this is the PULTEC program equalizer, and basically the idea here is I'm just kind of boosting a little bit of those, you know, kind of trying to create a bell EQ bill around those lows just to give the low end a little bit more weight. But again, that high pass filter is making sure that it's not getting too rumbly. And then I am also giving a little bit of a almost kind of like a shelf around 10K to kind of just give some space and width. And then the MEQ, which is the mid-range EQ, I'm just pushing 500 a little bit and then cutting out 300 just to give it a little bit of warmth in the mids, and then also a little bit of 5K. And it's less important like what frequencies I'm boosting. This is all just kind of done to taste. The idea behind using PULTEC is that they are tube equalizers. So it's imparting a little bit of analog warmth. So let's hear this without the EQ, and then now here's with the EQ. And then now we're going into a compressor, and this is an API compressor. And the idea behind this API compressor, again, is we have a little bit of analog warmth happening, but this is complementing the VCA compressor on the piano track. So whereas that one was adding sustain with a slow attack and moderate release, this, I want to catch the peaks of the transients. So this has a pretty quick attack and a pretty quick release. So then from there, we're going into a Universal Audio Ampex 1 ATR 102, which is just a common tape machine. And so basically the idea is if after you track something, after you mix, you're going to be printing to tape. So I'll always put a tape machine at the end of my master bus. But there's something kind of interesting worth mentioning here. So normally if I had a full mix, I would have a whole dedicated mastering session. Because this is just one track, I can kind of get away with mastering inside the same session. So, and we're gonna talk about mastering in a future video. But for now, let's just hear, this is no tape. Here's with the tape. So the tape is going to give a little bit, and again, just using a preset, the tape is going to give a little bit of warmth, a little bit of tape compression. And then the last thing that we're doing is we're going into this FabFilter Pro L2 limiter. And this is kind of the finishing touch. And what this is doing is it's boosting the gain, and it's just clipping the very tops of those transients, just so that nothing is peaking. So this gets me up to the level that I want the track to be at ultimately, and then it's just kind of like, again, just cutting off the tops of those, like just where some of the extreme spikes. So that's our first mix. So in the next episode, we're going to be looking at adding some more channels, but we're still going to work up to a full mix. But if you want to keep going and look at another mix where we're going to be looking at a few more channels, you can click the video that's on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one, and have a great day.